What's up, everyone? Welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast that takes a trip down Philly sports memory lane and asks the question, what if? I'm your host, Jim Montgomery. You can follow me on Twitter and TikTok at Jimbo_Mont. Also, check out our YouTube channel for this day in Philly sports history. We're about 2 or 3 weeks in. I think pretty successful so far. We've been going through recently. This week is all Phillies this week as they try to close out the wild card. Coming into today, they were a game and a half behind the Padres for the second wild card spot. Game and a half up on the Brewers. They will first pitch for the Phils is in about 30 minutes in Chicago. Taping a little bit earlier in the evening what I normally do because I definitely don't want to miss that game. So definitely check out This Day in Philly Sports History. I will post them usually before 8 o'clock before I start my day job. And they will be either on TikTok, Instagram, if you follow me on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, wherever you can, go ahead and give them a follow and a like as well. Planned out the next few months as far as pod episodes. Obviously, there's going to be some subject to change depending on what happens, but got a Sixers and a Flyer preview coming up. I want to talk somewhat about some of the recent Phillies postseason woes. I have the college basketball preview coming up, and of course, all the birds you can handle. They're off to a hot 3-0 start. What's scaring me a little bit is everybody's talking about how they are the Super Bowl favorite in the NFC, which usually when people start talking about the Eagles like that, that's when things tend to go south. But if you listen to some of the past episodes, we're trying to get past that whole superstitious curse, negativity, negadelphia mindset. It's hard because, as you've heard, it's been ingrained in our minds since our grandfathers in the 60s. So we're trying. Hopefully we'll get there. But one other thing I have on the horizon that just want to kind of throw out there as well is I do want to look to get some guests on here, especially during basketball season, just for some different perspectives and things like that. Somebody told me before I started this whole process that typically it takes about 15 episodes or so to find your footing, so to speak. This is now episode 12. I definitely feel I'm in a much better spot now than I was episode 1, but I definitely want to make sure I get my footing down before I invite anyone on. But it's definitely coming. I want to make sure I have, like I said, what I want to do and sort of my vision and my goal in place first. And then we'll go. As I mentioned, the Eagles looking pretty good. As I mentioned in the Eagles preview, that over 9.5 win, knock on wood right now, that bet is looking pretty good. Also, our bet for them to win the division, again, knock on wood, is looking pretty good. So we'll continue with that. So speaking of the Birds, they are 3-0. This week, I'm very excited to be making my 2022 season debut. First game I'm going to this year. They are continuing their Super Bowl 52 reunion tour to start this season. At first, in week 1, it was Deuce Staley. Then in week 2, the Vikings came into Philly. Last week, it was Carson. This week, our good friend and pal, Dougie P, is coming back in. And then next week, we go to Arizona to visit Zach Ertz. So, since Dougie P is coming in this week, and to kind of give him a shout out and the nod, and I feel the respect he probably deserves and a lot of times doesn't get, today's whole episode is going to be focused on Doug Pederson. We are going to show our love, go through some of the what ifs, take a trip down Doug Pederson memory lane, and see where we end up. For those of you who might have not really been around, I don't know whatever happens sometimes. Hopefully we do have people that are not the biggest Philly fans watching, but for those who don't know, or just to refresh everyone's memory, Doug Pederson was our head coach from 2016 to 2020. During that time, he went 42, 37, and 1. We won the 2 division titles, made the playoffs 3 times, and of course, we have that Super Bowl title in Super Bowl 52. But again, You all know that. What some people may not remember, and I remember it vividly just because of what was going on at the time for the team. He was the placeholder for Donovan McNabb his rookie year. When Andy Reid came in from Green Bay, Doug Pederson was Brett Favre's backup. Andy Reid saw something in Doug. He wasn't necessarily the greatest player, but he was around so many good Hall of Fame quarterbacks that he had a niche for sort of coaching up and getting people, young quarterbacks especially, on the right path. He backed up Dan Marino for a little bit, Brett Favre in Green Bay, and I cannot think off the top of my head. There was one other Hall of Fame caliber quarterback that he did play with, and for the life of me, I can't remember. But so Andy Reid brought him in to be Donovan's mentor. He did start the first 8 games of that season, and if anybody remembers, it was a complete and total disaster. He was a much better coach and mentor than he was a quarterback. But hey, he did what he had to do to help Donovan. Once he got out of or retired from playing, he did get into coaching, and Andy had him on the staff here in Philly for a little bit, took him to Green Bay with him. And then when the Eagles fired Chip Kelly in 2015, he was one of the hot names coach-wise that people wanted to kind of bring in. Maybe not so much in Philly, but across the league. But I feel at that time, it was time to move on. And Chip, we talked about this on the podcast. Chip came in and Chip did what he did. And if it wasn't for Chip, I still say the moves he made, even though they were unpopular at the time, we wouldn't have gotten to where we were if it wasn't for Chip Kelly. With all that being said, it was time to move on. And for me, when I say move on, I felt it was time to, pardon the pun, but go back to the future and go back to some of those Andy Reid days. Because as much as we were ready to move on from Andy Reid at that time, you know, the whole saying, you never know what you have until it's gone. We were spoiled for that whole time Andy Reid was here. Yeah, there was a ton of choke jobs and unfulfilled expectations. And quite frankly, it's given me a chance to start this podcast because there's a ton of Andy Reid info and material coming. But after the whole Chip Kelly fiasco, it was time not only to move on, but something that was going to be more stable, something that was more what we were used to. And again, not sports science and whatever Chip was doing, who some of the stuff that he did was still good. But anyway, enough about Chip. So the Eagles brought in a few different people for interviews. The first one was Deuce Staley, who at the time was my top choice. To me, he was that perfect mixture of, and I still feel like he's going to be a great coach, but I feel like he was the perfect mixture of the Chip Kelly progressive and outside of the box thinking, and then the Andy Reid stable sort of status quo type coach. And again, he was the first one, former player, and I thought he had a real legitimate shot based on some of the things that Jeff Lurie was saying and whatnot. They brought in Pat Shurmur, who had ties. I believe he was here for a little bit with Andy Reid. Then he was here under Chip Kelly, and he actually was the interim coach that last game after Chip got fired. Again, he was sort of that good mixture. I think he was a little bit older, and I just, like I said, I didn't mind him, but I felt he was just sort of like, I think Deuce over Pat Shurmur would have moved the needle a little bit. The big hot name across the league that everybody really thought, I thought too, that the Eagles were going to go after was Adam Gase. And he actually had a great first interview in Philly, and to the point where they were setting up the second interview. However, he went down to Miami. Miami never let him leave, and he became the head coach of the Dolphins. didn't do shit there. Then he went to the Jets, which nobody does anything for the Jets. So thank God they didn't go with the hot name again. And I kind of questioned whether if they didn't have Chip Kelly and that was just fresh on their mind because Chip Kelly was the hot name that Jeffrey Lurie fell in love with. I wonder if that played a role into what the thinking and thought process was and why they let him go to Miami without hiring him. But we'll never know. They brought in Ben McAdoo, who was one of the assistants for the Giants under Tom Coughlin, who ended up staying with the Giants. They brought in Doug. And then, ironically enough, they brought in Tom Coughlin, who really everybody thought was going to be after, like, it was last minute, I think, if I remember correctly, that they brought him in. And everybody thought, including myself, okay, this is where they're going to go. Have Coughlin come in for a couple years, stabilize things, and then you let him groom somebody. The problem is when McAdoo got hired with the Giants, all of the people that Coughlin would have had on his staff were on McAdoo's staff. So Coughlin removed himself. So it was a weird way that the whole process went down. And it was almost like Doug Pederson was the best guy left standing, if that makes sense. I feel like they didn't think the Deuce was quite ready yet, which is shocking because of the way they hired Andy Reid, but it's a whole nother issue that we'll get to. But I feel it wasn't the sexy pick. It wasn't anything. It really reminded me a lot of when they hired Andy Reid, when everybody thought, huh? What are you doing? So needless to say, there were a lot of people who were not happy with the signing of Doug Pederson and the hiring of Doug Pederson as the Eagles' new head coach. I didn't hate it at all. I think a lot of what happened with Chip Kelly, Doug Pederson was not Chip Kelly. He had those Andy Reid ties. And again, I totally missed Andy Reid once he was gone. I think it took 3 years or two years and 15 games, whatever Chip was here, to make me realize, hey, we had it pretty good. Man, and then we all know what happened to Andy. He went and won the Super Bowl with the Chiefs. But leading up to the hiring of Doug Pederson, they had like another early round exit in the playoffs. There was some questionable play calling that 100%, if you follow Andy Reid's career, all of it looked like had Andy Reid's fingerprints all over it. But Doug Pederson, being the offensive coordinator, took the fall, fell on the sword for his coach. And that was sort of the stench and the stain that was on Doug Pederson coming into the whole hiring process and whatnot. So he was considered the worst coaching hire of the offseason, and Mike Lombardi said it was the worst he's ever seen in 30 years of being a sports writer or something crazy like that. I might be burning a bridge here for some future things, but Mike, come on, dude. Like, it wasn't that bad. I can name probably 10 off the top of my head, but we'll leave that for another time. And again, it was back to the future for the Eagles, and yeah, we were just ahead of our time. It's like we knew. But so Andy Reid did give Doug Pederson a glowing recommendation, which I think probably helped sway Jeff Lurie into making the signing. But so he comes in, and the team was in an interesting spot because prior to Doug Pederson coming in, I think that it was before the Eagles had the draft picks and made some of the trades they did. But they were expecting Sam Bradford to be the starting quarterback. Ultimately, Howie pulled his magic and got them up to the number 2 pick, where they were either going to get Jared Goff or Carson Wentz. And the idea was they were going to put Wentz on bubble wrap because I think he had missed some time in his last season. Because it was Division I AA, they wanted to get him slowly acclimated. So why not? You have Doug Pederson, who is supposed to be one of these quarterback gurus. give him time to work with Wentz and build him up. And besides, it's not like he was going to miss the whole season anyway, because it was only a matter of time before Bradford got hurt. However, speaking of people getting hurt, late in the preseason, I think it was at practice too. It wasn't even in one of the games. Teddy Bridgewater got hurt pretty bad, like almost to the point where I think he was ready to. They thought he was going to have to lose his leg. That's how bad his knee injury was. So late in the season, they traded Teddy Bridgewater, or I'm sorry, Sam Bradford to replace Teddy Bridgewater in Minnesota as a starting quarterback, like a week before the season started. Which, there you go, kid. Carson Wentz was thrown right into the starting position. You have a rookie coach, rookie quarterback. What could possibly go wrong? Well, the Eagles started off 3-0 before their bye. They ended up 7-9. Not terrible. There definitely was some growing pains, especially after the season got off to such a hot start. I think it was the Steelers they beat pretty bad, or I think it was the Steelers and the Browns, and there was somebody else in between that they beat. So they definitely showed some promise and some potential. And I think going into the 2017 season, everybody was excited. We're like, okay, we have the quarterback. Maybe Doug Pederson isn't that bad. He didn't have, he took Chip Kelly's 4 and whatever team that they had and improved them to 7 wins. So here's where, coming into the 2017 season, we thought that they were going to take the next step, make the playoffs. I don't think anybody thought they were going to do the Super Bowl. However, I think this season in particular, and I don't think he gets enough credit, this is where Doug Pederson showed that he was a pretty damn good coach. He kept them focused when Carson Wentz went down. They were like 13-1, 11-1, 12-1, something like that when he went down. And you see the clips of his locker room speeches, and he kept saying, great, we won the NFC East championship, but we're not done yet. And that was sort of the theme then going through the rest of that season and through that playoff run. If everybody remembers, when Nick Foles came in, he played like shit. He played horrible. And what Doug did was he sat down with his offensive guys, including Frank Reich, and they said, what can we do to maximize what Nick Foles is good at? Because him and Carson Wentz are completely different quarterbacks. So Nick Foles was not able to run the offense the way that Carson Wentz did. And I think, again, this is something that's underrated of what Doug did. He allowed Nick to be Nick. He changed some plays. He went back to when he was successful, that 27 touchdown, 2 interception year. I forget what year it was now, when he was just lights out. And if you notice, it took a game or two, but he was okay during that Atlanta playoff game, but once he got it down and exploded, he was back. In that Minnesota NFC Championship game, you saw it. Doug talked to the NFL and got the league to play Meek Mill as the team's entrance song coming in from the Super Bowl. He didn't have to do that, but he knew it was important to his players. And I knew as soon as I heard Dreams and Nightmares playing on NBC when they came out of the tunnel, there was no way the Eagles were going to lose that game. So there you go. Little things like that. And I mean, did I forget the most important, greatest play in Super Bowl history, the Philly special? And you don't think it's the greatest play? What's the greatest play? There's few plays that kind of stick out in Super Bowl. You have Lynn Swann's catch. You see the old NFL films of John Riggins running down the field, Leon Lett's fumble, Marcus Allen's run, Scott Norwood's kick. More recently, Malcolm Butler with the interception. What's the kicker for the Dolphins the year they went undefeated? Garo Yepremian trying to throw the ball. Those are some of those big plays or big moments in the Super Bowl that you remember. I'll take the Philly special all day. So there's that. So again, they weren't done yet, but next year, 2018, they went to the divisional round. Carson Wentz wasn't quite ready to play, so Nick Foles started, and he kind of struggled. Wentz came back, he struggled, got hurt again, and they won 5 of their last 6 to get in the playoffs, and they were one of the last teams in. But it was sort of that feeling that, okay, Nick Foles, Doug Pederson, are they going to have their magic? And they went into Chicago, played them in a decently close game, and if you remember, they got lucky, but it was the double doink where the kick, I think it was Cody Parkey actually, hit both the upright and the crossbar and missed the field goal. Then they went to the Saints, who a couple weeks before in the regular season destroyed the Eagles. I think it was by like 40 some points, and they hung tough with them. And I still think one of those things, like Alshon Jeffrey dropped that pass, but there's a couple plays leading up to that I think could have changed the outcome of that game. But again, considering your starting quarterback, who was the favorite to win the MVP before he got hurt the year before, wasn't quite fully back from his ACL tear and then got hurt again. You had to throw your backup in, and coming off all the hype and the hangover that goes with the Super Bowl, not a bad coaching job by Doug Pederson. Then 2019, all of a sudden they got off to another slow start. Wentz still just was not, I don't know what it was. He just wasn't able to, I think something mentally was wrong with him, and still to this day is wrong with him after he got the ACL injury, because he's not been the same since he got hurt. He has like flashes of that, but he was consistently just he was literally unstoppable for that stretch in 2017. Then he got hurt, and he's not been the same since. But he started to get it together late in that season. They started off again poorly, but they got hot. They won the last 4 games, won the division, and if this sounds familiar, it's sort of the Andy Reid MO of slow starts, get hot late, take that into playoffs. And I think we all felt good that year. They came back, won the division. Sure, they were 9-7, but you got into the playoffs, and then we went from there. Seattle came in, Seahawks. I remember at that game, and we had a good feeling. We're like, all right, here we go. We're going to have some of that magic again. And then, of course, like early in the game, Clowney just completely cheap shot at Carson Wentz. Nobody's going to tell me any different. And that, for all intents and purposes, ended the game. Josh McCown did decent in trying to rally them late. But, I mean, the guy was coaching his son's football team like 2 or 3 weeks before. So he wasn't in any kind of shape. And, again, any Seahawks fans out there, that was a cheap play. And if you don't want to admit that, that's fine. But that was a cheap shot. He should have been ejected from the game at least. But no, he got a 15. I don't even think he got a 15-yard penalty now that I think about it. Like, thinking back on that, I think that was the big uproar about that. Dude didn't even get a penalty for it. Not like basically almost killed Carson Wentz, but no penalty. So whatever. Yeah, I'm still bitter about it. Anyway. Then 2020 came, and it was a hot mess express all around. First, we have COVID. And, I mean, first you could have fans, and you could practice, you couldn't. It was just a mess. They also drafted Jalen Hurts in the second round, and I think that move shocked everybody. Not so much because we were all so in love with Carson Wentz, but they had just signed him to a ridiculous extension. So everybody's like, wait a minute, why are you taking Jalen Hurts, who was one of the higher rated quarterbacks in that draft? And I mean, you took him in the second round when you had some obvious needs on that team. And I think that was the nail in Carson Wentz's coffin. I think mentally he was never the same after that injury. And I think drafting Jalen Hurts kind of shook his confidence. I don't know if Doug Pederson was responsible for that, if that was strictly a Howie Roseman thing. I know there was the whole controversy when he was benched in favor of Hurts. And I think there was definitely some push and pull with Doug and Howie over who should be starting. I don't think, one way or the other, I don't think they were seeing eye to eye on who should be the quarterback. And ultimately, that was the end of both the Wentz and the Doug Pederson era. And I mean, looking back on it, he record wise, he was over 500, 42, 37, and 1, 3 playoff appearances in 5 years. The first year was with a rookie quarterback. The last year was with COVID, which I honestly I don't think really anything should really. I don't want to say not count, but it shouldn't be held against anybody because of just how jacked up that season was. But I mean, he went to the playoffs 3 years in a row, won the city its only Super Bowl. So I think he got a pretty shitty deal at the end, and I think, granted, I have the ability to look at this now on September 27th, 2022, with the way the Eagles have started. But I think Doug Pederson is gone because of Jalen Hurts. Now, if all of a sudden that turns around and Jalen Hurts is the real deal and continues to play like he's playing this year and the Eagles win a Super Bowl, then you know what? It was well worth it. So for today's What If, I didn't know which way to go. I feel like there were two ways we could have gone with it. We could have gone with what if they never hired Doug Pederson? They could have gone with Deuce Staley. They could have gone with Adam Gase. They could have gone with Ben McAdoo, Tom Coughlin, one of those guys. And the other one is what if they never fired Doug? What if they gave him a chance to say, you know what, Doug, COVID fucked everything up. Let's just see what you can do moving forward. We don't think Carson's the guy, but go ahead. You're the quarterback guru. Look what you did with Wentz before he got hurt. Look what you did with Nick Foles in the Super Bowl. Go ahead. Here's the keys to Jalen Hurts. What can you do? And I think they're two very different answers. I think if we didn't hire him, no Super Bowl. I don't, as much as I think we suffered with Chip Kelly and our reward was winning the Super Bowl, I don't think you do that with anybody but Doug Pederson. That means you probably hired Ben McAdoo or Adam Gase, and we saw the disaster that McAdoo was in New York. We saw the disaster that Gase was basically anywhere he's gone since then. You probably still end up with Carson Wentz as your quarterback. I think Howie had it in him once he got rid of Chip Kelly. He needed to almost do like a clean sweep of everything. So I still think he makes those moves, trades Kiko Alonso and Byron Maxwell, gets those draft picks and everything. And I don't think Carson Wentz ever has that MVP stretch he had in 2017. I think whichever coach it was, they fuck him up. Look at Daniel Jones. Look at who's the guy that plays for, I'm sorry, I can't even think of his name now. The guy that was with the Jets and now he's in Carolina that got all jacked up by Gase. Look at Tannehill. I mean, Tannehill did have some success, but I just feel like Carson Wentz would have been way more messed up, way worse than what he is now had we not had Doug Pederson. And truthfully, we're probably on our second head coach at this point. It's been this is now second year of Nick Sirianni, so we'd have definitely had two coaches since that. So I don't think it would have been a good thing if we didn't hire Doug Pederson. So Mike Lombardi, not bad for the worst hire that you've ever seen. But again, I'm just the bridge is already on fire. I might as well just make it burn quicker. But if we never fired him, and this is nothing against Nick Sirianni, I think he's done a great job. I'm excited to see what the future holds for him. I still somehow think we end up in a similar situation that we are this year because Doug Pederson's a good coach. Period. All the haters out there, Doug Pederson is a good coach. Period. I think he coaches up Hurts. I don't think he ever, I think whatever happened, he would have been able to say, I can't have both of these guys on my team. Get Carson out of here. I think Carson still would have ended up in Indianapolis with Frank Reich. This is a still to be determined what if, but I think, and again, nothing against Nick Sirianni because I actually like the job he's doing. I love where this team is at after 3 games. I think Doug Pederson does very similar things, and I think he gets the same sort of. I think Jalen Hurts is the real deal, basically, is what it comes down to. I talked about this in the Eagles preview episode, but I think he's the real deal. So I think not that Nick Sirianni, and I'm sure Nick Sirianni has something to do with it. Hurts is going to put in the work. You give him somebody that played with Dan Marino, Brett Favre, Donovan McNabb, and I think he's going to impart all that wisdom onto Hurts. And like I said, we're still in a similar spot, and this is still to be determined. But the bottom line is, Doug Pederson is a good coach. I hate the narrative that he's not a good coach and he's this and he's that. And, he won in spite of that. It was Nick Foles' magic. It was the defense. It was Howie Roseman's move. No, give the man his credit. Welcome back this week, Doug. You're a good coach. Thank you for what you did. He was put in a no-win situation in 2020. And he probably took the fall for Carson's poor play, shitty attitude, refusal to practice, inability to step up as a leader, none of which is his fault, and then throw COVID on top of it. Who are you going to put the blame on? Might as well blame the coach. Coach gets way too much credit sometimes when they win, and he gets way too much credit when they lose. In this case, Doug got way too much credit for the bad vibes and the bad shit, and not enough credit for the good stuff. So everybody says, oh, he was nothing with Frank Reich. Look what happened when Frank Reich left. Guess what? We have the benefit of hindsight now, obviously, but it wasn't Frank Reich. Carson Wentz just sucks. He was never the same quarterback, is not the same quarterback since that knee injury. That's not on Pederson. That's on Wentz. Pederson's done whatever he could. It's not his fault that Wentz is a little bitch with a fragile ego that couldn't handle the fact that Nick Foles got all the glory for winning the Super Bowl, and then couldn't handle a little competition from Jalen Hurts and just cried. So he sucks. And yes, there's going to be plenty. There's a future episode coming up about this whole Carson Wentz thing, because now you got me fired up. And nobody's going to tell me any different. Doug Pederson took the fall for Carson Wentz not being a true leader and being a little bitch, and for COVID. So there's that. And maybe I'm still in post-Super Bowl bliss because it's only been 5-6 years, and maybe I'm drinking the green Kool-Aid and I'm blinded by the light of the Super Bowl ring, whatever you want to say. Doug Pederson is a good coach. Welcome back this week, Doug. I'm looking forward for the standing ovation you're going to get on Sunday. And then once the whistle blows, you're going to get booed. But hey, that's the way we do in Philly. So thank you, Doug, for everything. Welcome back. I wish you nothing but the best. Go to your favorite restaurants. I'm going to hate you once the game starts, though, because that's just the way it is. But again, make sure you guys are checking out This Day in Philly Sports History every day, daily on YouTube. Like I said, it's up by 8 a.m. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, Jimbo_Mont. Like and subscribe this podcast. As I said, we're about 3 episodes away from me finding that footing, so look forward to some guests. And Philly's first pitch is in a couple minutes, so let's go Phils. Hopefully when I see you next week, it's going to be good news. But until then, have a great week, everyone. And until next time, I'll see you when I see you.